Okay, so you can start with any piece, but obviously we want, they're both the same. So you're gonna mark your grain line, which is gonna be about an inch, inch and a half. I would do an inch from wherever you ripped your muslin, okay? So again, if you have a hard time doing it from top to bottom, measure an inch away in the midpoint. From that midpoint, drag your pencil. Go back and check it. Okay. And then you have your grain line. So the center front will be where the grain of your skirt will be. This is a very basic skirt, so it's not challenging at all. You can fold back that line since this will be pinned to your mannequin.
How many inches was that?
About an inch. You could do inch and a half if you want more, but about an inch should be enough. Okay, you're just establishing the grain line. Okay, and then we'll have our bodices to reference. Okay, if you need to make adjustments to match these darts later on, you can do that, but it's much easier if you have the darts already completed the way you want them to, so then you can align them up with your skirt pattern, okay? But for now, I'm gonna fold this up to not distract me. And for now, what I want to do is I want about an inch and a half to 2 inches from, so you're gonna make a marking of where your waist is and leave about an inch and a half to 2 inches above that. And that's just clearance, so you can build your seam allowances, and also you'll see how everything collapses towards the front to create the darts. So allow yourself some room. Remember, when you're draping, you need a lot of workspace around there. So you don't want to start down here, and then when you're going to your side seam, you're cutting into your side seam and you're cutting away from your waist. And then that's when you're gonna mess up your skirt pattern. So always make sure you have some work room there, okay? Even just a little bit, if you need more, that's fine. But remember, the more you give, the more distracting it's gonna be as well. So it's also not that beneficial if you have too much. So about an inch and a half to 2 inches should be more than enough, okay? Then from there, you're gonna measure 8 inches down. Okay, and then drag that line. Okay, now you have your center front and your hip line, okay? And you can mark it hip, low hip if you want, and then mark the center front, okay? Now, you go back to your mannequin. Go back to your mannequin, you start pinning your center front. Whenever you drape anything, I've noticed a lot of you are not pinning your center fronts and your center backs accurately. Always try to anchor it at the main points. So like the bottom of center front or the neckline of center front. Then anchor it in between and then the bottom, obviously. That way you have better control when you're tightening it at the side seams and you're not pulling this away. Imagine if I had this just pinned to there, let's say an inch below the waist, and I'm pulling this, I'm pulling the center front and the grain off. So I'm gonna distort the drape of my skirt, or top, or whatever it is, you're gonna distort that. So always make sure you anchor it at the beginning points, okay? And don't worry about these tape lines. Everyone put their tape lines for whatever they're designing. We're gonna go based on this 8-inch, okay? But the key to the 8-inch is this functions just as the bust grain line. Remember the bust line we drew? We have to make sure this is parallel to the floor and it's even all the way across. We have to do the exact same thing for the skirt. So that's why you draw that hip line, okay? But let's anchor it a little bit more. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and add 1/8 of ease along my hip. You could do 1/8 or 1/4 because when you sit down, everything expands. So you need to give yourself a little bit more room there. If you drape it true to the mannequin, it's gonna be super tight and the seam's gonna rip and she's not gonna be able to sit in this. So add about 1/8 from the fold or 1/4 if you feel like that's too little bit for you, but add some ease in there, okay? And then we're gonna pull this hip line to the side seam and make sure it is parallel to the floor and it's leveled from front to side, okay? Can you see here? And you're gonna pin it. Okay? And you're not gonna pin above the hip line, you're gonna pin below it to just secure the muslin. Okay? Make sure everything's even and is parallel to the floor. You don't want this line to skew down or skew up. Again, you're gonna change the pitch of your skirt and the front may kick forward and may swing to one side and you don't want that, okay? So make sure you have that. Now, you're gonna create darts, but before you do that, you wanna take this fullness, okay, and lightly kind of brush it up towards the top, okay? And again, it's gonna do this coning naturally. You don't want too much in here, but you don't want too little, okay? And you have to kind of see how the fabric falls and see how it naturally cones as well, okay? So once you do that, you start pinning your side, and if you need to, you can clip into your side seam as well. Some people clip it here if they want a little less, and if they need to pick it up a little more, okay? So pin along your side seam. Don't concern yourself with the bottom, that should be hanging straight if you pinned your hip line correctly, okay? Okay, now, we're gonna test this as a skirt too because we're gonna test waistbands, but remember this skirt has to attach to your bodice. So one thing you wanna do is always reference your bodice and see where the darts land because you want those darts to meet. This is just a good photo that I found of a dress that was draped. So this has a waist seam, and this actually has princess seams, but you can see how the princess seams match up with the darts. That's what you want. That's exactly what you want. Okay? And you see the hip line right there? That's about 8 inches below the waist. And everything's clean. You have the bust, and you have your center front grain. This is a full toile, which you'll get to with your final term project. But for now, we're just doing half toiles, okay? But this is the goal I want you all to get to. So that's why it's key for you to reference your bodice and make sure that you can get the dart on the correct place, okay? So one thing we're gonna do is we're gonna do 2 darts on this skirt. We're not just gonna do 1 dart. We wanna distribute the fullness evenly. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually mark where our dart would meet. It would meet around there, okay? So I mark it based on my bodice. I'm not gonna tell you exactly where to mark your dart because I don't know where your dart is falling on your bodice, okay? So I'm marking it the way it falls on my bodice, okay? So, and you can gently mark guidelines for yourself on the side. And you can mark the waist a little bit. Okay. These are just guidelines for yourself, okay? So I have that. Now, I want my second dart to be at least 1.5 inches, 2 inches away from my side seam, okay? So you can measure that. I'm gonna do 2 inches actually. And that's where I want my second dart, okay? So one thing about darts is you never want it to go past this hip line. Once it goes past this hip line, you are removing all ease, and that is when you're completely wrong and you kind of ruined your drape right there. So remember that, okay? So once you have these marked, you can measure the distance between your two darts. So it's 4. So that means each dart will get about 2 inches. So I'm gonna divide that in between. That is not where dart is going, that's just showing the half mark of the amount of fullness I have here, okay? So once I have that set, I'm gonna pin back my side seam. Pin down this dart. And another thing you could do, that's why I said you could gently mark your waist so you can start clipping into it, okay? If you don't clip into your waist, it's gonna really hold the fabric and you're not gonna be able to take up the maximum amount of ease that you have into that dart, okay? So your skirt is gonna end up being a little loose, or it's not gonna be as tapered enough in the waist. It'll be kind of boxy, unless that's the look you're going for. So try to clip into your waist, okay? Again, don't be scared to clip. If you clip into it too much, just tape it or sew another patch of muslin into it, okay? So, see, even after I clipped it, I see I need to shift my, oh no, it's correct. So now I'm gonna start trying to manipulate these darts, okay? Start where you marked them. Okay. And just pin them. Now, if one dart has more ease than the other, just shift it until you get this line that you drew evenly between the two darts, okay? That's why you mark this little dash right here, is to show if that falls evenly between the two darts, okay? So you want to make sure that's kind of even. It's not going to be exact, okay? But it's going to be somewhat even. But make sure you don't lose the placement of your dart, especially the one that matches your bodice, okay? You don't want to lose that, okay? So now I have my two darts. I'm pretty happy with the placement. The notch that I made is relatively even between both darts, and I took up the full amount of ease I needed to, okay? And then you can start marking your waist. Okay. Really make sure your side seam is marked. And then for the bottom part, I usually just do like a soft marking, but you're actually gonna take your ruler and just draw a straight line below that, okay? But I kind of gently mark it, the side seam of my dummy, just so as a guideline to tell myself not to go too much past this line or not to go cut in too much into it, okay? You can cut into a straight skirt to create a peg skirt, which we're not doing yet. But once you have a straight skirt, you can actually cut into it to peg it and make it narrow at the bottom, but we're not doing that yet, okay? We're just gonna go completely straight. Now, these darts here, usually the back darts are longer than the front darts. Usually the front darts vary from, the difference is usually like 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch difference between the front and the back. And that is because the back kind of plateaus and flattens and the fullness is lower, while in the front you have a little bit more fullness because of the belly and just the natural shape of the body. So just remember, you don't want these darts to be too deep because you're restricting movement here. And also there's nothing more unattractive than seeing the fullness down here. So you want to disguise that as much as possible. You want that part to just kind of hang down straight, kind of away from the body. The part that should be closer to the body is in the back. Okay, you want that plateau and then the fullness of the bottom at the back, okay? So I'm gonna mark my low hip, my high hip actually, 4 inches as a guide, just from the waist marking I did. And I didn't have you guys do that from the beginning because obviously your waist placements vary depending on your bodice. So if I gave you a measurement just to do the 4 inches from the top marking, that 4 inches will vary based on how your waist drapes onto your bodice. So once you drape your skirt, the top of your skirt, and you add the darts, then mark 4 inches. Once you have the 4-inch mark, I want you to go at least 1/2 inch above that marking, and that's where your darts will end, okay?
1/2 inch above the high.
Above the high hip, correct. So you'll mark 4 inches from the waist, and then 1/2 inch above that is where your dart will end, okay? That's like a safe zone. So your dart does not become too elongated, and you take away that ease in the front body, okay? So you can make the marking right there of where your dart will end. Make sure, dab it. This high hip marking you can ignore because you establish your endpoints for the front of your skirt darts, okay? So now I want to go to the back, and it's practically the same thing. You're gonna mark 1 inch to 1.5. Again, if you need to start from the middle, start from the middle. Okay. Pull back your grain line. And this pattern would be for a center back zipper, okay? Again, 1.5 inches, 2 inches above your waist of your bodice, you'll mark the skirt, and then 8 inches below that will be your low hip. So there's one thing I should mention about the hip line is they don't always match exactly at the side seams. They do sometimes, but not always. The key for the hip line is to make sure the skirt is balanced all the way around. That's key, okay? If they don't match at the side seams perfectly, that's okay. As long as the grain is consistent between the front and the back, you will have an accurate fitting skirt, okay? But I'll show you in a moment. If your grain is off from the front or it's off in the back or whatever, then your skirt fit is gonna be incorrect, okay? So I'll show you what I mean. So we've established the front hip already. We'll establish the back hip, okay? Again, I'll put a little bit of ease here. Okay, and then I'm gonna pull my hip forward towards the side seam. Okay, make sure it's parallel to the floor. So you see my front hip line's a little higher than the back one. Okay? That's okay. As long as I establish the balance and they're consistent from front to back. Yes, dear.
No, I was gonna say, are they both 8 inches?
They're both 8 inches. So what happens is you have so much fullness here that it drops it sometimes, the hip, okay? Because you're trying to get the fullest part of the skirt. And we're working with a generic measurement, which is 8 inches from the waistline. Now, if we were doing it for a customer and we tweaked it a little bit, maybe 7.75 of an inch or 7.5 inches, depending on her body and the fullness, then those lines will vary and change as well. Okay, but I'm giving you a standardized 8 inches just for a basic skirt. This is Dum Dum front, back, center zip skirt. There's nothing complicated or unique about it, okay? But once you get to fitting an actual customer, you will measure her waist and then you would mark her low hip depending on where her fullness is. Sometimes her fullness is higher, sometimes her fullness is lower, depending where the fullest part of her hips is. So you have to take into account her buttocks, her hips, the front of her hips. So that's very important when you're making clothes for a customer. You're always gonna build and start from the widest point to the body and then go to the narrowest point of the body. You're never gonna build from the narrowest point and then go out. Unless you're doing a full skirt, you have tons and tons of yards of fabric, which the hip no longer becomes relevant because it's all depending on how much fullness you can build into a waist, okay? So once you have this, you can pull back your front a little bit, just so it doesn't, mess up your back. Again, you're gonna see this natural coning of the back, just like the front, and you're gonna pull up the fabric, making sure this hip line stays parallel to the floor and consistent, okay? Any questions? No? Now make sure again, I'm gonna repeat myself, but make sure you anchor the points so they're consistent. So when you're pulling, you're not pulling away from your side seam or your center front, okay? Now you could draw your guides if you want. Okay. I usually just dot my waist when I create a guide, and then when I actually truing it, then I go back and do slashes, okay? Just so I'm not confusing myself and creating so many new lines. So if you want to create dots for everything, do it. Then once you drape it, go back and add your actual slash lines, okay? It just keeps your work a lot cleaner. So again, I'm gonna mark where my dart is matching my bodice. And if you're doing just a skirt, I mean no bodice or dress, then you would make the dart, the first dart closest to the center back and the first dart closest to the center front align with your princess seam, okay? And then the second one, again, the same 1.5 to 2 inches away from the side seam. But always start with it on your princess seam if you're just doing a skirt. So I'm gonna mark my dart there. Again, I want this dart 1.5 inches, 2 inches away. I'll do this one 1.5 inches. Okay. I'm gonna measure my distance to create that midpoint guide. This one's 5.5, so that's gonna be.
So wait, Professor, you marked the dart,
Mhm.
and then you marked like how many inches from the side?
So I marked a 1.5 to 2 inches from the side seam.
From the side, and then
Mhm.
you're finding the middle.
And
of
then
that.
I'm finding the middle ground to create that notch, to create a guide. So
Okay.
I know I'm taking too much on this dart and too little on this dart, or vice versa, okay? But you always make sure you mark that 1.5, 2 inch dart distance and that dart that matches your bodice, okay? Or if you're just doing a skirt that matches your princess seam, okay? So 2.5, I'm sorry, 5.5 is gonna be 2 3/4. Let me mark that. That's just a guide for myself, so I know what I'm working with. Okay. I'm gonna pin down this dart, or just pin it down so I know where to start. Pin this down. You could pin your guide down, just kind of like guesstimate where it falls in between, but you're gonna adjust it. Okay. Then pick up your darts and see what you have to work with. Relatively, these are even, so pin that. Are you guys hot in here? Yeah. Sorry about the heat. But... Again, when you're draping too, you don't want to do it too tight. Pull your waist too tight because it also has to go with your bodice. So you don't want your skirt waist to be too small, but you also don't want it to be too big. So try to always reference your work. It may not look like it, but I am looking at my bodice, seeing what's underneath, seeing if I'm pulling it too tight or too loose, because obviously I want to make a dress after all, okay? So I'm checking all those things as I'm working. So it's a multitask thing. It's not like you just do it and then it's done and it'll fit perfectly. You really have to relate to your previous work and see where you're going, and if this reflects to what you're doing above, and if it'll work. If not, then you're gonna have to make adjustments. Okay? So I have my darts. Okay. I'll measure the 4 inches from my waist. Okay. So now, since we're on the back, your dart is gonna end below the high hip. Because like I said, the darts on the back are always longer than the darts on the front. They're not, even if they're close in length, they're always at least 1/2 inch longer than the ones in the front. And remember, because we wanna eliminate this fullness here on this, I call it the plateau because it's a little flat before you get to the fullness down here, okay? So instead of going above that line, I'm gonna go below that line, and I'm gonna end my dart anywhere from 3/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch, depending on the fullness of your bottom here, okay? So I'm gonna do mine 3/4 of an inch below that 4-inch mark. Okay? Okay, so now I have my markings for my dart ends. This line, no matter, it becomes irrelevant now. And then you can start marking your waist. Remember to mark your optake on the other side of the darts. Even though you marked your dart, you need to mark the other side as well. And then mark your waist. Okay. And then mark your sides. Okay, if you want to lightly do a guide for the bottom part, you can, but you don't have to, okay? So I think I'll stop here. I'll let you guys start on getting to this point, and then we'll true the skirt together. While you're working on this, I'm gonna come around and kind of review your bodices, okay?